full transparency, first couple years of diabetes, my A1C was up at 12, which I averaged about a 300 blood sugar for the first couple years. And you might be thinking, holy cow, you're a diabetes educator, you're a dietitian. Like, how could you allow this to happen? I was 8 years old. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. So this podcast has been a long time coming. I've probably had now, 2-3 years of people saying, Ben, when are you going to start your own podcast show and talk about diabetes from your perspective? And I never really gave it a ton of thought, but one of the questions that really sparked me to get on this journey was people kept asking, how did you get to this point where you are now, where you have dedicated your life to helping over 1 million people living with diabetes to have incredible blood sugars and eat the foods that they love and become stronger than ever, both inside and out? And I realized I've never actually shared my story of growing up with diabetes, living with diabetes, and how I've gotten to this point where I am a dietitian and a diabetes educator. So I figured what better way than to kick it off and share just a little bit of background, because vulnerability is something that is really important to express. And within the diabetes world, there's so many different unique angles and different perspectives of what has happened and what continues to happen. And I feel like it would be really important to start out with what went down. So let's take you back to good old 7-year-old Ben. I had been living in the state of Michigan with my fam, and we decided to move to Wisconsin. I did not want to go. And, you're 7. You have your friends, kicking butt in school. You're feeling great. Everything's amazing. And I go to this brand new foreign place that I didn't want to go to. That was strange at the time. Still kind of is to me. But, I'm there and we're going to a theme park for the first time in my life. It was a day in August 1999. And it was Six Flags just outside Chicago. So we drove for an hour or so in the car. I'm super excited. I've never been on a roller coaster in my life. And we walk in the gates, tons of people, there's tons of rides. It's incredible. Nothing short of incredible. I'm with my brothers, with my fam. And 10 minutes in, my dad gets a phone call on one of those giant cell phones that's probably the size of a brick. And the information from the other side of the line is Ben has type 1 diabetes. And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that I was at Six Flags. This is amazing. I'm at a theme park. And this somber mood kind of fell over the entire rest of the day. I couldn't even tell you what ride I went on. I couldn't tell you what games were played. I couldn't tell you anything except for that the next day, my butt was in the children's hospital pretty much the entire day. And I'm over here thinking about, how am I going to make friends? Who are going to be my friends? How am I going to do well at school? And I now have this brand new condition that I know nothing about. Gratefully, I'm in a situation where I did not have to go through the typical hospitalization that you may have had to go through if you're listening to this and you have diabetes, where you go into diabetic ketoacidosis, you're in the hospital or the intensive care unit for days on end before you get your formal diagnosis. Fortunately, my dad works in healthcare and I was able to avoid that situation because he started to see some of the symptoms. I had lost about 7 pounds in my 7-year-old body. I was peeing every 10 seconds. I was pretty irritable, and I was already a pretty irritable kid, but I was pretty irritable on top of what I normally would be. All the hallmarks of high blood sugar. And I go into the children's hospital and they start just throwing out anything and everything that could possibly be thrown at me. And fortunately, I liked math. I still do. But I'm getting told you have to have this many grams of carbs at breakfast, this many grams of carbs at lunch, this many at dinner. You have to do this for your insulin and that, and you have to take these injections. And my head is just spinning. I don't know anything. I'm 7. Isn't this supposed to be my parents' job? Isn't this supposed to be somebody else's responsibility, not mine? And boy, was I in for a fun time. So I am working on typical 7-year-old life. How can I become pals with people in this new school, in this new state, in this new city, new everything? And now I've got a new condition on top of it. And needless to say, within about a month, I was taking my own injections and counting my own carbs, which I'm very grateful for. But the rules I took very literally. I remember being told I needed 75 grams of carbs at lunch, 75 at dinner, and I believe 60 at breakfast. And I remember taking it so literally that if I had 73 grams of carbs, I would have to dig around to find those extra 3. So there was a time, vividly, I remember this. I got 3 pieces of string cheese because each of them had 1 gram of carb, which ironically is from whatever they use to, bind it and keep it intact as string cheese. And I would eat 3 pieces to make sure I hit exactly 75 grams of carbs. It was that literal. And the education at the beginning, granted, again, I was a kid, but the education at the beginning definitely left something to be desired, which certainly shaped why I do what I do now. But the first couple years were brutal. I was on multiple daily injections. Continuous glucose monitors did not exist. The meters were so slow. They were legitimately the size of remember a VHS tape? They're about the size of that, maybe a tad bit smaller. They were so slow they had an ad ticker on the bottom. I'm talking things that would say, this month at the Children's Hospital, come to our diabetes support group. And first of all, I didn't want to read that. But second, it took a full minute to be able to get my blood sugar. I remember at one point, I didn't want to explain what my meter was to a kid in my class. And it had a little square that would literally move in a square type of shape until my blood sugar popped up. And this meter gracefully only took 30 seconds. And they would ask what it was. And I told them that the number at the end was the score of the game that I was playing. And they asked why it required blood. And I said it was a very intense game. So clearly I wasn't all about sharing everything. But the moral of the story is it was a lot. And my blood sugars were all over the place. There was a lot of, hey, dose for it later. Hey, we're out and about and there's a snack here. You can just dose for it later on when you get home and have your insulin. Or, hey, this looks like it's about 70 grams of carbs. Just dose for 70 and we'll see what happens. There wasn't any sort of scientific method to figure out what my ratios should have been. There was no method of, oh, this is what you need at this point in the day, or eat these specific foods. It was kind of count your carbs, dial up, and hope that you're good. Which, if you've had diabetes for longer than a couple days, you probably know is not the best route for long-term sustained success. And full transparency, first couple of years of diabetes, my A1C was up at 12, which if you don't know what that averages out to from a blood sugar perspective, I'll help you with the math. There's a formula you can use. I averaged about a 300 blood sugar for the first couple of years. And you might be thinking, holy cow, you're a diabetes educator, you're a dietitian. Like, how could you allow this to happen? I was 8 years old. I didn't know anything. I was just a kid trying to follow directions and try to get, good grades in school and have fun and be a kid. And physical activity was a whole mouthful in and of itself. Doctors would tell me, oh, you might be able to run around a little, but forget about sports. You're not going to be able to do a whole lot of that. And the first year I took it very literally and I did not play any sports. Recess would come, I'd watch the other kids play football and I would just walk around and hang out with whoever I was friends with at the time. It was not a great time. And as I got older, I wanted to start defying some of these things, especially surrounding physical activity, and started learning how could these things change? How could I test some of these limits? And I really felt like I had to grow up a lot faster than my peers did because I'm over here taking insulin that is keeping me alive and counting my carbs up and packing my own lunches at the age of 8 years old. Whereas my peers are having their parents pack their lunches. They don't know what carbs are. They don't know what really anything is food-wise. They're just eating whatever tastes good. And maybe it's a fruit roll-up or some gummies, but that was my low snack versus, I had to delineate carbs at a pretty young age. So it was kind of crazy. And you lose a little bit of your childhood and that innocence of childhood of running around and not knowing what's going on because you have to be in control from the start. And fortunately, my parents really tried to promote that independence, which at the time I did not appreciate. But looking back, I am so grateful for, because if that didn't happen, who knows where I would be right now. But I start growing up, I start falling in love with sports and baseball and football, play Little League, all that fun. Blood sugars are still bouncy, and gratefully we switched to a different doctor, different endocrinologist. It was farther away from where I lived, but my A1C starts coming down. Now I'm in the 9s, turn 11 years old, end up deciding to get on a pump. My A1C goes down to around 7, which all things considered, not terrible for a kid who's a preteen about to be a teenager. And a really big thing that happened, and this one I want to make sure I share because it was monumental to why I do what I do now. But I, went into middle school, new school, different district, whatever, and made friends with some people. Of course, loved sports, loved football, love all these different things. I just played my first year of baseball and was doing pretty good. And so I made friends with these kids, and they were on the local travel team, which I didn't know existed because I wasn't in the same school district. And one of the kids' dads was the coach, and they had winter workouts. I would go every single week like it was a religion, because to me at that time, baseball was the religion. that I followed. And my work ethic was there. I'm showing up, I'm playing well. There's a tryout for this team. I'm super excited. And, of course, there's a ton of adrenaline as well because I want to make sure I do well. And they have the tryout. It was over 2 different days, over 2 different weeks. And I make sure I show up both times. And at the time, I'm a first baseman, outfielder. I'm mashing the ball, crushing it. It's fantastic. It's cold outside, so it's all indoors. I'm running pretty decent. Everything feels really good. And after the tryout, I'm with a couple of my friends, including the coach's kid. Coach's kid looks at the clipboard and where the roster is of who's going to be on the team and tells me, hey, I'm so excited. You're on this roster. We're going to be all on this team together this summer. We're going to be traveling around the state, playing in different tournaments, playing against other teams. This is going to be the most amazing summer ever. I'm so, so excited. And we're all thinking this is great. So let's go to Dairy Queen and celebrate. And so the kid's dad, who's the coach, drives us over there and we all order and I go to test my blood sugar. And a topic I can go into a different time, but how to deal with adrenaline in sports and blood sugars. I didn't know at the time what was going on, but I test my blood sugar and I was 465. That's pretty high. It's very high, as a matter of fact. Probably because I was so concerned about going low during the tryout, so I went the opposite direction. And it's actually kind of a miracle looking back that I performed as well as I did. But in the moment, I had 2 choices, right? I had the choice of I could keep it to myself and not say anything, or I could be the outspoken self-advocate version of myself that at that point I was. And so I mentioned, hey, my blood sugar is 465, so I probably shouldn't eat this ice cream right now, but I'm going to take it home. I always wonder to this day, if I just kept my mouth shut, what might have been different? But obviously you can only play counterfactual, the other game, and maybe there's a parallel universe. I didn't say anything. So anyways, the dad's like, oh, are you good, etc. I'm like, yeah, I'll just take some insulin, it'll be fine. Get dropped off at my house. Next morning, get the phone call super early in the morning. It was like 7:45 on a Saturday morning. Why they call that early, I don't know. Why would anyone call someone at 7:45 a.m. unless it's like an emergency? But I digress. Get the call from that coach, my friend's dad, and he says, hey, Ben, sorry, but, you're not on the team this year. Thanks for trying out. Better luck next year. And pretty much implied that I was a medical liability. And that hit really hard. I was devastated. But think about it. You just practiced all winter with your best friends at that time. You're already told you're going to be on this team. It's going to be so amazing. You're so excited. You play well. And then you're told that you're not on this team pretty much because of your diabetes. And from that point forward, it was a major turning point for me, both within my athletic career at that point, but also just socially, because of how I started to perceive diabetes. I had, gotten the typical teasing growing up and it wasn't great, but that really hit because that just showed, hey, diabetes just took this from me. And I'm not sure I really want to share much about it to other people going forward because how might it impact me? What might happen? So I became real reserved about it. Didn't really talk about it a whole lot to people, didn't really share it a whole lot to people. Of course, the people on that team, now that they're on this team and I'm not, they now think that they're, better athletes than me and better baseball players than I am when I know that it's not exactly the case. And I started having to feel like I had to do everything twice as good as everybody else did just to even get the time of day, to be looked at, to be, perceived as someone who had some sort of value. And eventually started to run with different crowds and these, athletes, etc. And it did not go very well. I started just shutting down because I didn't want my diabetes to ruin anything that life would present to me. And needless to say, with baseball, that reputation of the medical liability, of course, the next 2 years, same parents or the coaches, didn't matter. Didn't even get the time of day. I remember in 8th grade, it was the last year of that travel team, hitting balls off the wall in center field, which was, 300 feet from home plate. It's the only kid hitting the ball off of the wall in center field. Nothing. Oh, sorry, you didn't try out. Well, try again next year. Good luck in high school or whatever. And it was devastating and it got really tough. And I started to withdraw more and more because the thing I cared about most, the only travel team in the area, was being taken away. Going into high school, it just continued to follow. And by that point, from a self-esteem standpoint, the diabetes starts eroding what I have. But what I did discover in between was I started recognizing, well, if I'm going to play and I'm going to compete and I'm going to be good, I need to start training. I need to start getting stronger. I need to start becoming more athletic. I need to start figuring out how to become a better athlete. And you might be thinking, how does this have to do with diabetes? But I'll get to it in just a second. So I started lifting weights. I think it was summer before I went into high school. Started lifting weights. Didn't know what I was doing. Had some dumbbells. Had access to a machine with a couple cables and some, the basic shoulder press and chest press and lat pull down, the basic stuff. I did what I learned how to do from some seminar I had taken when I was in 8th grade. And I started doing that religiously. And I started noticing some increases in strength, which then started to translate to increases in performance. And it took a while, but I was consistent. I started doing some more cardio activity. I started noticing how that impacted my blood sugar for the better, but I also started noticing how that impacted just how I felt and how I felt about myself. I still hid the diabetes. There were times I remember I went to this youth group event and I remember going into the bathroom to dose and then getting different food from everyone else because they were eating pizza. And someone asked me, why are you eating different food than us? And I didn't want to say anything. So I said, well, because I'm lactose intolerant. That was what I pulled out of my butt. Lactose intolerant. Like, really? That's how much the diabetes had impacted me up to that point that I didn't want to say a word because I thought I would be treated totally differently than everybody else. And it's a far cry from where I'm at now, of course. But again, different time, different situation. So I start going through, high school happens. I finally go to an event. They still have it these days called Children with Diabetes. It's down in Orlando. Massive conference, tons of people with diabetes. I met a bunch of kids my age and I started realizing this isn't weird. This isn't abnormal. Like, it's okay to have diabetes and to express who I am and be the person that I ultimately want to be. And I then went to a baseball camp right after where a lot of players at a high level were playing and they were participating, and it was also in Florida, so different group, didn't know anyone. And these people are saying like, hey man, you're really good. Like, you can throw really hard. You're fast. Like, you can hit like this. And I'm thinking in my head, this is crazy. No one's ever told me this in my entire life since I was 12 before I tried out for that team. And so I came back with this new confidence and I went to this youth group event, the same event that someone had asked if I was lactose or why I was eating different food. And I said I was lactose intolerant. And I remember saying to them, they said, hey, why are you eating something different? Because I would plan the food out with whoever was in charge of the event in advance. I remember saying, because I have type 1 diabetes. And I expected everyone to treat me differently. And everyone said, oh, that's cool. That's awesome. Is there anything we need to know so we can help? And I was thinking, holy cow, nobody cares. This is amazing. And from that point forward, I started to get so much more confident and realizing this didn't have to run my life. This didn't have to become my identity. I could still train. I could still play baseball. I could still do all of the things I wanted to do without feeling like it was taking over my life. And that was when things really started, not necessarily to take off, but the confidence started to grow. And I started to try different things out of my comfort zone relative to before. And I eventually, go on to college. And in college, I was playing baseball on this team. I'm rehabbing from an injury that I had suffered about 6 months before. But playing on this team, I'm one of the better players on the team. And I was definitely one of the team leaders, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm playing and things are great. And I start realizing I need to continue training really hard. I'm lifting more. I'm doing more cardio. I'm doing agility. I start realizing, nutrition seems to really be that X factor. Like, when I perform well, it's always because I ate really well. And when I, don't perform well, it's because my nutrition's not on point and my blood sugars aren't on point. And it became really interesting too, because I would notice when I would pitch, because I eventually converted into only pitching, if my blood sugar was over 250, I would start to feel like I was walking in molasses the whole time. Like, every time I'd pitch, it would feel like I was working 10 times harder than I had to because of my blood sugar being high, and likely because of the dehydration, everything else. I'm in Florida at this point. Like, it's, you're going to dehydrate faster. And it just started hitting me. I'm like, there's a connection between your blood sugars and your performance. And growing up, I'd always been told by the diabetes educators that I was on my own. It was, hey, here's, this professional athlete's way of eating. Try this and see if it works. It was never diabetes focused. I would ask questions, what should I do to gain more muscle? They didn't really have an answer for me. What should I do to be able to get stronger? They didn't really have an answer for me. It was kind of figure it out and you'll be fine. And so in college, I started realizing there's this connection between performance and nutrition and exercise. And I wanted to intersect them, kind of what I call now the holy trinity of blood sugars, nutrition, and physical activity. And there were no good answers. But I knew that the moment I was 250 or higher, I had 2 innings of pitching in me, and then I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn if you paid me $1,000 on the spot. And my control would unravel, my focus would unravel, and I would play terribly, and I would feel disgusting, and it wasn't great. But I started realizing I needed to really focus on my blood sugars, but I really needed to focus on my food. And of course, from a performance standpoint, and just I wanted to have a body I was proud of, especially, given that I'd gone through the ringer growing up. And so I started to make the connection on the food side. And given that no one gave me answers as a dietitian, I was curious, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to improve how I feel and improve my numbers? And I started really focusing on my blood sugars. My sophomore year of college, I still didn't even have a CGM yet because they were pretty novel technology at the time. And I remember getting my A1C to about 6.6 and being so proud of myself. And I was thinking, holy cow, this is amazing. There was still way more variability looking back than I would would have wanted. But I realized this has got to be the ticket of what needs to happen. The blood sugars have to be on point. And from there, started messing with different types of diets, started diving into the nutrition just as research for fun on my own outside of classes. So I started looking into keto before it was cool. I went low carb for about 9 months before it was cool, down to 50 carbs a day. I, did the alternative end of the spectrum, eating 450 carbs a day just to see what my body felt best at, and started really going on this self-exploration journey into food and what it could do and how it could impact and help my blood sugars and my performance. And I did a bodybuilding show sponsored by the university. I did all sorts of other training. I eventually stopped playing baseball because I wrecked my elbow, but I still wanted to train really hard and get really strong and become really fast. And then I realized that nutrition was the area that I loved the most. Subsequently decided to go get a PhD in nutrition, focusing all on type 1 diabetes, which my dissertation would have been had I decided to go through with it, or what the relationship is between, what's the best macronutrient combination, carbs, proteins, and fats on blood sugars and body composition, which probably doesn't sound like much of a surprise if you've, followed me at all on social media for a while. And I ultimately left having done everything but the dissertation because I realized I wanted to work with people and I wanted to work in the trenches with the people that need it the most. So with you, with anybody who's listening to this, with anybody who lives or loves someone with diabetes, because those are the people, patient-centered, that really need the impact, and they need it now more than ever. And in addition, the correct information and the proper information is just not out there. So I took that research, started applying it, started, put my journey on social media a little bit more, and then ultimately, switched programs into the dietitian program, and instead of the PhD, became a dietitian, and then realized, hey, I want to become a diabetes educator because that is the best that I can possibly get to, and eventually became that. And gratefully, I've been able to accomplish that, and now work with people every single day living with diabetes to accomplish those better blood sugars, live that life that they love, eat the foods that they love, not feel restricted, lose weight, gain strength, have a body they're proud of, and just be that person they've always wanted to be without any sort of restriction, having all of the confidence in the world from a diabetes standpoint, and basically supplying that information that did not exist when I was diagnosed, when I was going through this journey myself. And providing that info that when the dietitian would tell me at the clinic, hey, Ben, here's a, offensive lineman's way of eating, try this, giving people information that they can apply for them specifically. Not a generalized approach, not everybody does well with this. Hey, this is what works for you, or what we believe will work for you and is pretty darn close, and we'll finesse it until it does. That is the approach that we take, my team of dietitians and I. And all of us live with type 1 because we get it, right? Because I joke with people, if you don't live with it yourself, or you don't live with someone who has it, it's really hard to understand exactly what it's like day in and day out. And if you're that person that lives with somebody who lives with diabetes, you kind of get it because you see what they're going through, and maybe you're impacted by the blood sugar alarms at 2 a.m. But you, of course, don't live with the holy cow, I want to eat the whole fridge because I'm 52 at 3 a.m. type of thing. So that is how ultimately I've gotten to this place of where I am right now, and why I'm here, and why I'm helping you. And you got to experience some of young Ben and his misfortune, if you want to call it that, or his fortune, and be able to go through that journey with me alongside and kind of get an idea of what led to this point right now. But I could not be more grateful for the opportunity to get to educate, to get to work with people in the space, get to spread the knowledge, the wisdom, and ultimately provide the confidence that you need to be able to crush life living with diabetes for the next few weeks, months, years, decades, centuries for that matter. Let's just throw that out there. So of course, drop me a message over on social media or drop a comment down. Let me know what topics you want me to cover on this podcast. I'm happy to do so however I can. I'm here to support you, your endeavors, your blood sugars, and I cannot wait to see where you're going to go in the near future from a diabetes standpoint and a life standpoint. So with that, I'll catch you in the next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.